Marcus Smith. He's one of the brightest talents in English rugby, world rugby. The way we play, the identity to us as a team, he kind of embodies that. Also, not just about the flamboyance and the ability to get a team firing. I think so many other aspects of his game have really come on, both in a Quinn shirt and an England shirt. The audience that England rugby attracts is probably 10 times bigger than what Premiership attracts. We need to generate some of that tribalism to the club game, where in football it's almost just a given, like 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I think we need to capture some of that audience transfer. And if we're going to genuinely say, look, we think this is the best product that we can put on the field, then yeah, absolutely, we need the best players on the field.
Fascinating.
Laurie, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, you're very welcome. Good to be here.
Well, we're all about topical news on the business of sport, so just thought it would be worth starting. We saw about an hour ago that you've announced a new contract for Marcus Smith for another few years. How important is that for the club moving forward?
I mean, he's one of the brightest talents in English rugby, world rugby. I've worked with him, known him for 5 years now. Yeah, it's hard to think. When I certainly joined Quins, he would have been 19, 20. Probably was his breakthrough season, just coincidentally, not as a result of me joining, by the way. He'd done a lot of the hard yards before that point. But so it's been lovely to see him develop into the player that he is. The way we play, the identity to us as a team, he kind of embodies that, I think. But also not just about the flamboyance and, you know, the ability to get a team firing. I think so many other aspects of his game have really come on, both in a Quinn shirt and an England shirt. So, and look, he's hot property. So for us to tie him down and for him to commit himself to the club, I think it's a big sort of statement to the fans, to the rest of his teammates. But also in terms of how we want to manoeuvre the club going forward from a commercial aspect, he's pretty integral to that. And I think...
Was it difficult to tie him down?
No, not really, no. He's going to get interest, of course he is. He's, as I say, I think he's one of the best players in the world. So a lot of teams similarly play the way that we do, which probably is would be more either in Europe or further afield. Look, he's going to garner interest, and I'd be surprised if he didn't. But equally, he understands Quins. He understands that Quins is, I think, giving him the ability for him to develop into the player that he is, into the person that he is. We're massively connected to him, to his family. And so, yeah, look, it's obviously incredibly pleasing to get it done. I think a big part of how we want to develop the sport is going to involve the players, ultimately. It has to involve the players. So, again, for us as a club, if we're going to take the club forward in the direction that we want to go to, then we need to keep some of our best assets. And he's arguably one of those.
Can I ask, how do you think about the dichotomy of like wanting a star culture because it's brilliant for brand, it's brilliant for selling tickets, it's just good business having a star, it attracts people and attention. But then also, with the Quins, we're not a Marcus Smith show, Johnny Wilkinson show. You can tell when I watch rugby. Whatever it is. Charlie's like, oh, God.
I'm impressed we got that.
Thank you so much. I remember Jason Robinson. He was my favourite. Yeah. But my point being, like, versus no, we want a Quins, not a Marcus Smith show.
Yeah, look, you have to have that balance, don't you? And I think he would be the first to admit that he's a team man, first and foremost. And there obviously has to become a point where, look, he's got to negotiate his own position and get the best outcome for him as an individual. But equally, the team doesn't tick without the other 23 players on the pitch at some point during that 80-minute spell. So there's 8 players in front of him, as in physically on the pitch, that do all the hard graft that ultimately means he gets the ball to do what he needs to do. So he'd be the first to say, look, his stock, his identity doesn't exist without the other people around him. But equally, you do need star assets in order to provide a product that is then transferable to a consumer base. And he is very typical of the way in which we as a club believe the game wants to be played, should be played. I'd say probably, where are we now, 2024? in late part of 2020, going into early 21, we did quite a big piece of work around redefining what our purpose of a club was. Quite a bit of work around our vision and creating a real clarity around our value proposition, which was ultimately so that everybody within the playing department had a real clarity around, right, why are we doing this? Why do we take the field? And what's the expectations of us? But really importantly, wanted to have something that everyone in our commercial part of the club equally understood what the vision of the club was and what we believe the behaviours are really particular to us about being a Quin. Everyone's a Quin, whether you pull the shirt on or whether you're in the marketing department. We're all Harlequins. So what's that value resonance? And equally, it can mean something really different for someone if they sit in the ticketing team as to what it means to Marcus, for example. But there's a real clear clarity around, right, this is the purpose of why we do it and how we do it. And the final point I'd make is what became really, really abundantly clear was that this DNA, this has existed for decades within the club. So the ground's named after Adrian Stoop, who existed, he lived and played for the club decades ago, but he was the Marcus Smith of his day. And there's other people like Waver Wakefield, who Ronnie Poulton played for England. Guy was a maverick, absolute maverick. So it just became really clear to us that we've got Marcus now, Caden, Alex Dombrand. We've got players that have got star appeal and play in a certain way, but these boys are just now in a line of people that have trod this path way before them, and it's connecting those legacy stories into who we are now that's a really important piece.
Do they have control of their image rights? So are they able to do a lot of things outside of the club as well to help build that profile?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of them structure their contracts in different ways.
What are the different ways you can structure your contract?
So you can do a straight sort of salaried contract where you just paid by the club. But there's aspects of you can carve out certain image rights where the club have purchase rights to those images. So obviously the bigger players are the ones that will do that. And so if we believe that we can dually and jointly commercialise the club through their image, then they get paid in their contracts are structured slightly differently. But it's not, the key thing is you've got to physically exercise that right and that value. It's not just a piece of paper. So we therefore use obviously some of those star players in order to amplify the club's IP. And it's not a surprise that players like Marcus or whoever are going to do that.
How's it been for you, thinking about the club then as a whole? The last few years have been challenging in Premiership Rugby for a number of reasons where clubs have been struggling. Yet from the outside, it looks like Harlequins has been one of the clubs that has been doing really well, utilising lots of different things to be able to kind of draw in the continued audience and sell out the ground, etc. How have you managed to navigate the last couple of years to continue to build the momentum around Harlequins as a business?
I think first and foremost, we've got to go back 3 or 4 years. COVID was a train smash for everyone, not just in rugby or sport generally, obviously just day-to-day life. I think we ended up using it in a bit of a cathartic way to have a look at what we were as a club, a bit around, as I say, what our purpose was. Took a bit of time just to connect back in with our sort of belonging story without sounding too sort of philosophical, but just, as I say, create a bit of purpose. So as a real massive positive, when we started to come out of COVID, we actually exited a lot of those restrictions as double champions. So the women had won their league. And because we've gone through this sort of revisiting of our sort of who we are and our architecture and sort of connecting us all up a little bit better, the boys came out as champions. So when we actually switched the lights back on and opened the gates to everyone, we'd created this real desire for... we're in the entertainment space anyway. We kind of thrive on, relationships and connections, whether that's internally or with our fans. So to then sort of come back out as champions meant that we really kind of had the tiger by the tail in a way to say, look, we were going to continue playing the way that we want to play. We'd reconnected in with a bit of our playing identity. And everyone was just desperate to get back into live sport and engage in that environment. So that was one big lever that we pulled quite hard. And actually, when we came through as champions, we then subsequently had we've had some good seasons since then. We've not either even last year where we probably tailed off a bit in the Premiership, we went to the semi-final in Europe for the first time in the club's history. So we've had positive seasons ever since. And our playing style and our brand of rugby is what our supporters really buy into. So that's been really positive. But the other thing that we've really done is we've just invested in the product. And when I say the product, I mean what the stadium experience is when fans come to the ground. So I'm a massive firm believer that we shouldn't just rely on whatever the 80 minutes or the 90 minutes of the sport is. We're asking supporters to sometimes give up huge proportions of what their disposable income may be, depending on where they sit within that sort of economic demographic. So we've got to be able to justify what that investment is to the club and create real strong relationships. So when we came out of COVID, we invested a fair bit in our venue and our stadium product. So that, as I say, we are...
What does it mean to invest in the stadium product? Like better restaurants?
Yeah, so better concessions. And our capacity is just under 15,000. So our ticketing, across our membership and our ticketing, would equate in broad terms for probably 35% of our annual turnover. So
30 to 35% of annual turnover. Is that normal?
Yeah, probably not. It's probably not dissimilar to a championship. From my time working in the Championship, it's probably not massively dissimilar. That also doesn't include our Twickenham matches. If you were to take our home matches plus Twickenham, then you'd be looking somewhere probably about 40% of our turnover comes across those two areas.
Media, like in terms of rights, digital, how much of a percent does that play in terms of revenue makeup?
Our sort of split would be, again, broad brush. Well, if I talk about where the key sort of fundamental areas are, so obviously we get central funding from Premiership Rugby and the RFU, whether that's a split across central sponsorship, broadcast rights.
Is that much?
So the way I'd probably put it would be, again, that there's a lot of comparables you could draw to the Champ. So it's probably about 25-ish% of what your turnover would look like.
Whoa.
Would come from central distribution or central sort of funded inflows. So there's a huge reliance on the club to be self-sufficient and have a lot of its own organic growth.
Wow, but TV is not much then.
It wouldn't compare the same way that Premier League football would compare.
Wow, I'm shocked. How much is TV then?
Well, as I say, I don't go into the specific numbers, but if we turn over somewhere around between 25 and 30 million, it's going to be somewhere around 20-25% would be what we would take centrally from RFU, PRL, and our sort of central stakeholders.
How was the investment in the league when it was made by CVC, that money when it came through, how was that distributed amongst the teams? And was that specifically focused on any particular areas, or could you spend it however you wanted?
No, admittedly, that's just before I joined, but I think it was a dividend that was ultimately, their investment was into the league. It was then divided amongst all the clubs. Excuse me, and that was then at their discretion as to how they wanted to sort of utilise that. Some clubs invested maybe back into facilities. Probably by that point, a fair amount of club investors had already been going into their pocket, a fair amount, probably in the preceding years. So some of them took it as a bit of a payback for the investment that they'd already put in.
So you could like fund a director's loan with a CVC investment. If you think about owners who are continuously funding their ownerships and assets in the club, you would take a director's loan out against it to fund it. And then when CVC pay you, you could refund your director's loan, pay off loans with that.
Yeah, but you've invested it for a reason. I mean, you've loaned it for a reason. So, yeah, you'd probably say any owner who's putting money into the club anyway is doing it because they want to.
I was just about to say that the one differential in my experience, I think football... I think there is a fundamental difference between a football owner and a rugby owner. Rugby ownership probably feels like more... And this is not a catch-all statement, by the way. This is just my personal opinion and perception. I think rugby owners have got a far more belonging, or there's a far more... I was going to say authentic. That's probably not even the right word either. But there's a connection as to what they're doing it for. And there's a huge amount of passion and investment of time and loyalty and heart into that I think doesn't quite exist in the same way in football. Probably a lot of football clubs are probably they operate within their means, I think. Some of them will, well, the way that football's structured obviously is around profit and sustainability. So you kind of have to, at some point, you have to operate within your means. Otherwise, you're going to get clobbered and fined and, suffer consequence to that. So that is designed in order to keep clubs profitable or at least sustainable a little bit more, whereas rugby operates on a salary cap. So that's designed to make the competition far more evenly matched, and therefore anyone on their day can go and win it or beat anyone in theory.
Can you break down, just so people will understand, what is the salary cap situation right now in Premiership Rugby?
So it's 6.4 million is what you can spend on your first team squad. But there's a number of other...
How many are in a full squad, sorry?
So it varies team to team, but you'd need a minimum of probably about 40 players of first team, somewhere between 35 and 40 of contracted first team players. But that doesn't mean to say you wouldn't then potentially supplement with senior academy or players that you can see would either get the value of training with your first team. Again, it's not quite the same as football, where you would probably have quite clear distinctive squads. Your under 18s, your under 21s are probably over there, your first team squad, and you might have the occasional crossover, but we've got about maybe a dozen players that would frequently train in with the first team, which might be dictated by how we want to train, or it might be dictated by whether 7 players are away with England, or it might be dictated by whether we've got a Premiership Cup game coming up, in which case we want to put more of our youthful team out onto that on that team selection. But generally, it's probably between 45 and 50 is what you would need.
Can I ask, do you think that's anywhere near sufficient? I was just running the numbers in my head. But if you paid them 150 each, and you got 40, you're going to be over the salary cap. And 150 for a Harlequins squad member does not feel like a particularly huge amount.
They're not all paid that. There'll be varying degrees of, you'll have some that are paid more than that, you'll have some that are paid less than that. And again, you have to sort of put into context where a player is on their career and on their trajectory. Other positions determine other salary quantum. So, and it's not a hidden secret that because this gets published, a fly half, it may not surprise you to know, is probably one of the most highest paid, if not the highest paid player in the squad, or on average across the league, would command the greatest salary. So,
and there are players that sit outside the salary cap, correct?
Yeah. So we've got one marquee player that can sit. It used to be 2, but in a sort of motivation to try and make rugby run economically more efficiently, that was voted to trim down to 1.
And they can be paid whatever, or is there
yeah, in theory. Yeah, they can. There are some restrictions around whether you have a player that sits within the cap that you then move into a marquee position. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to... It's designed to stop someone... Well, if we use the example of Marcus, because we've been talking about him, it would stop another English Premiership team going, right, we'll move Marcus into the salary cap and pay him 50k for the sake of argument, and then a year later we're going to bump him into a marquee spot and pay him 2 million quid. You couldn't do that.
Does it ever create, back to Harry's point at the beginning when he asked around, the culture of togetherness and not sticking your head above the parapet, when you have one player that sits outside of it, does that create any issues within a squad? Because it is very then obvious that there's someone here who's
driving a Range Rover to training ground and everyone else is
not the Mini.
Yeah.
Is it maybe it's not a problem at all because those players are, as you said, so iconic and you want them in the club?
I think there's probably an element of, I think they know. Don't get me wrong, I'm not in the change room, so I don't
Yeah.
I don't listen to this firsthand, but I think I've been in the environment sufficiently enough that they probably is an element of teasing around it. But I think your point's probably fairly valid that if someone's in a marquee spot, it's for a reason. And I think the genesis for the idea when it was first created was that wouldn't be a restrictor in order to attract the best talent to come and play in the league. So whether, going back, rewinding the clock a sufficient amount of time, Nick Evans, for example, came to Quins many years ago. I don't believe, I might be wrong, but whether the cap structure existed at that time. But the principle about enabling clubs to be competitive on a global market scale meant that marquee positions allowed them to do that. And also the other thing to bear in mind is the cap there's no gun to anyone's head whether they spend to the cap or not. And I think probably a couple of clubs don't. A lot of them will, but not everyone does. So it's at the club's discretion whether they do that or not.
If you were to change anything about the cap structure, magic wand, what would you change?
I am a believer in the cap system. I think that look, we can to and fro as to whether or not the quantity is right. Obviously, players will always have their view because they're going to, protect their worth quite fiercely. I think the bit that we've maybe got wrong previously is I think the cap should ultimately fluctuate depending on how commercially viable the league is, and that's probably the bit where we've not quite got that bit spot on.
Or the club is. Like, if one club earns 25 or 30 million in revenue and another earns 14, it's a very different business. You wouldn't cap different businesses with the same cap on a spend when they've got highly different revenue streams.
Yeah, but the only thing there is then you would destabilise the ability for any team to competitively take the field and beat any team. It should ultimately, in my opinion, it should be at the discretion of the investor and the board, whether if they want to go to the 6.4 million cap. And by the way, the bit that we didn't get to is there's other credits that are applied. So the 6.4 isn't the actual cap ceiling. It's important to state. Clubs get additional spending credits based on whether their squad members are homegrown, so they've come through the academy. So you're rewarded more in cap space spend on top of the 6.4, whether the player's a homegrown player, whether they are English qualified. You then get subsequent credits whether the player plays for England at test level. So when you're all said and done, the actual cap spend probably goes somewhere north of 7.58 million, all said and done. So the actual squad investment is more than 6.4. And it's so I guess an answer to your question, or as a comment to the question and the discussion, it is at the discretion of the club how well you develop players, whether you're in a good catchment area, where you convert those players from developmental players. So Marcus, we picked up at 14. He's been in our system for 10 years more. So we may argue, or certainly you would take the investment in a player in the round because they could be generating certain credits or return value in terms of central income that would reduce that salary investment that you're putting into the player. So there's a number of things at play.
The cap's used as a stick to beat the league with when it comes down to ability to retain top talent. Where do you sit on that side of a discussion? Do you actually agree with that, or is that far too simplistic to put it down when you lose players to France, for example?
I think that's probably too simplistic. I think every single player or sort of individual case needs to be analysed on its own merit. We've had one or two leave. Wasn't necessarily because we couldn't fit them in the cap, for example. There could have been other aspirations around that player wanted to leave. Sometimes it might come down to that. And look, the salary cap is therefore designed to, as I say, drive competitive advantage within the playing groups, but also to try and make the economy of rugby as sustainable as it can be. Would we have a situation, if there wasn't a salary cap, would we have a situation where some people would just spend and spend and spend? Possibly.
You said, it's in there to try and create the sustainability, but we've lost 3 teams in Premiership under these cap rules recently. Yeah. So, it's designed to create that financial sustainability, yet under these measures, teams are going bust. So how can that...
But I don't think that was a salary cap to blame.
Okay. So if a team is struggling financially, then as a rugby club right now, if it's not salaries and wages, where is it?
So I think, look, it's not for me to necessarily comment on those 3 clubs individually, but I think the resulting pressures that each of those clubs had were not entirely down to player salary cap situations. One club was investing quite heavily in their squad, but equally, one club didn't own its own stadium. One club had a number of other understandable pressures as it exited COVID. So I don't think I'll just take a broad brush approach and go, right, they're just invested in their squads too much. Yeah. As I'd go back to saying, everyone's got a choice. You can spend your cap in terms of that 6.4 quantum. You can spend to 5 million, you can spend to 5.5, you can spend to 6, you can go to the 6.4. You've also got to make decisions around what's the wider sustainability of your business look like. We're fortunate at Quins in that we've got a really good commercial strategy. We've got levers that we can pull to grow and to drive as much sort of revenue as we can into the club. We've been sold out for 3 years straight. We've got 2 matches that take place at Twickenham. We've got a really, really strong partnership roster of sponsors that invest with us and go on the journey with us. So we're in a strong position in that regard, and we're still not quite getting to the levels where we need to be sustainable year after year on our own 2 feet. But what we do,
are you profitable today?
No, not yet.
How far off?
Not far. So, I mean, again, this is all public information from the last few years. So within the last 3 years, we've probably made losses of between 3 and 4 million, depending. Some of those have been situations slightly out of our control.
And so does the owner just cover the gap there?
Yeah. And again, it goes back to what I was saying a second ago. I think just my reflections that the ownership, the sort of the identity of a rugby owner, in my opinion, feels slightly different from other sports that I've sort of certainly had experiences with. And certainly for our owners, they've owned the club, I think, since 1-2 years after it turned professional. Wow. So I couldn't, when we went through the COVID pandemic, I literally couldn't have wished for 2 more emotionally, financially invested individuals to make sure that we all stayed as a family and survived. And yeah, look, we made sacrifices. Everyone took a salary cut. Well, everyone within reason. You know, we created a threshold in terms of that earning banding. So not everyone took it, but certainly within the vast majority of what we felt was reasonable.
Is Harlequins a better business than Wolves?
The thing that drives Wolves' profitability is operating in a more global market. There's no question about that. And the thing that changed overnight when Wolves was promoted to the Premier League was the change in broadcast income that came along. So, and we had a record championship year the year we got promoted. But that then increased 5-fold, literally in 24 hours, from going from the championship to or 4 to 5-fold overnight from going championship to Premier League.
Right. And also it doesn't necessarily guarantee profitability. What it does is it also raises your costs significantly because there's a premium and a tax that isn't applied in championship when you go and start
on your payroll bill, that also probably goes up 5 more fold overnight as well. But again, you have a choice as to how much you want to, whether you want to invest in your squad. And some clubs will invest for sustainability. And what I mean by that is they'll invest to finish 17th. And they'll be happy with that. Or at least they'll be comfortable with that as a principle. Of course, everyone wants to finish higher than 17th. But they'll be happy with that as a principle because they know that as a baseline, that 125 million or whatever their turnover is, approximately, is almost guaranteed by finishing 17th. And so that then dropping down to a 25 million turnover by dropping down a league, putting to one side parachute payments, that's worth fighting for. But everyone will have they'll have their bandwidth as to what they're prepared to invest. So I guess trying to answer your question.
So if you were to answer, if you're investing in one of those businesses, which one would you invest in to make more money? I know it's not a business of making money, but I'm just like, which one is a better business, do you think?
I think rugby's fundamentally got some journeys to go on. And I think I do believe the future can be massively bright or continue to be bright for rugby. We need all of the ships to rise at the same time and in the same way. And again, I'll sort of I'll happily sort of expand on that in a second. But look, if you're looking at a more immediate return or a more immediate ability to grow an investment, the investors at Wolves invested in 3 years later. Their turnover's gone from 25 million to way north of 100. So I guess as an immediate, and then don't forget your brand IP goes up exponentially and massively as well. And you're investing in player assets that, we had some players that we acquired at a value were sold within a period of time and they've gone for 4 or 5 times that value. So I guess the ability.
It's football.
It's football.
It's football.
But you've equally got to get it right.
Yeah.
You've got to, it's not an absolute given that you can just stroll in and make money. Otherwise, everyone would do it.
Well, that's it, right? Well, football's up here because you can sell a player for 50 million in a way you couldn't in rugby, and you could get promoted and suddenly your club value quadruples overnight. You can also fall out the bottom of it and completely suffer at the same time. So it'd be your risk profile on an investment, if you were looking at it like that, would look a lot different. based on your football club versus your rugby club.
Yeah, the risk and the risk and reward is definitely high. But equally, the other thing I'd say is when we went up,
At Wolves, sorry.
Yeah. We weren't just reliant on, right, here's a check from Sky and here's a check from global broadcasters. We worked really hard to diversify and grow our own organic commercial opportunities as well. So we grew quite quickly. As I say, as a result of trying to globalize the brand a bit quicker, we had players that were really, really quality, that we knew. We were ambitious and we felt that we could finish far higher up the league than 17. So we had that aspiration. And I guess to your point or question, if you go in with that and you achieve that, then again, the margins can be much, much bigger in terms of what you can potentially walk away with or what you can convert in a relatively short space amount of time.
Should there be a salary cap?
It changes the dynamic. I think one of the fundamental flaws that you have in a profit sustainability model in football is, it's no secret that the rich clubs just get richer. The bigger clubs just have the ability to go and go and go. And even as someone who's a follower of my lifelong following is to one of the top 4 clubs, I'll leave it sort of ambiguous. Even in that environment, it really suits the bigger clubs within the league. So the other clubs that don't have that ability to either make more money or have the risk to lose more money are always going to be hamstrung. And that's ultimately why you'll ultimately have in that model, you'll have a top 6 or 7, and then you'll have the remaining 13, 14 clubs that will ultimately try and coexist with each other. Whereas if you had a straight salary cap model and format, I still think you'd get the ability to grow your brand and you get the ability to monetize yourself like a Man United or a Liverpool or a Man City can. But in terms of how you are then competitive on the field, you'd see Bournemouth beating Liverpool or Man City on a more frequent basis if you're restricted as to, right, you can only spend 85 million on your squad regardless.
So we should have a salary cap then? If it's about increasing competitiveness, fairness.
Yeah, if it was well, yes. There's 2 parts to answer that. Yes. But then if you are aspirationally wanting to go and win Europe and compete on a broader field than just England, which is where rugby can get itself slightly unstuck. So I guess the challenge, bring it back into a rugby context to make the point, if we got to the semi-final of Europe last year, which the team should be massively credited for and with, because we knocked over some good teams to get there. We ultimately got to a semi-final, lost out to the winners down in Toulouse. Their team is made up of a high proportion of the French national side. Their salary cap operates on a different level to us. They competed in the final against Leinster, who don't have a salary cap. So in their competition, there is no limit to what you wish to invest in your squad. So they've got, I think, probably 2/3 of the Irish national side in their team. So if you're then, I guess, back to the question then, if you're operating in that space where you've got variances of how different economic models work, is always going to be difficult. So you'd limit the chances then of an English Premier League team going into the Champions League and probably winning it if they're trying to compete against a Galactico side of Madrid where they're unfettered as to what they can spend.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd ever see a Premier League team voting for that as a model, by the way.
You mentioned that there's a rising tide that can lift all boats here. Harlequins is one of the boats, right? What does the tide have to do to start improving, should we say, product rugby?
Look, put to one side the crude way in which it was arrived at in terms of being a 10-team league, which would have not been in the way that anyone would have wished to get there. The competitive nature now of the league, you just can't lose too many games, and I don't think many teams are now. Like, you know, we've won half the games we've competed in, and the points gap for us into the top 4, for example, is still relatively narrow, and we've still got, you know, several games still to play. So I would still be optimistic that we'll do what we need to do against our sort of season start objectives. And I think the general competitive nature of the league and all the data and all the statistics that we look at in terms of the gap of points won or lost at the end of a game, tries scored, they're the most competitive than they've been in seasons. So the actual product on the field, I believe, is in really good shape. So we need to continue believing that, investing in that, working with our broadcasters in order to put the product in the best shot window that it can. So the quality.
Do you think they put it in the best shot window today?
Yeah, I think we're certainly in as best a position as we ever have been, and some of that's down to the quality of production and the punditry, and I think, and then the style of play and the identity of the way the teams play, the stars that we've got in the league. I still, even though we've a couple have moved overseas, I still think we've got some of the best athletes in world rugby that compete in our league. I think one of the things that we could do to improve rugby's. It's a complex sport. And even as a chief executive and someone who played the game at an amateur level for many years, sometimes even I sit in the stands and I'm a bit like what's that? What's he done there? Or what's the referee given there? Or like, so if I sit there and I feel like I'm relatively comfortable with most of the laws in the game, and I feel perplexed sometimes. I don't know how some of the fans understand that if they're sat in the stands and aren't quite as hardwired in, or just equally, you might not have the visibility in the seats or the stands to understand or see what the referee's given. So I think we've got a way in which we can transmit better data, better information through the flow of the game, so fans have got an understanding of what's going on during the game, and equally just some of the things around some of the plays within, some of the statistics within the game around how teams are competing will drive more of a resonance into following the match.
Do you think the current rugby league structure is optimised to get the best out of the sport? And I'm going to include Premiership Rugby, URC, Pro 14.
I think where we've got a sort of a focus or an opportunity to our domestic cup competition, I don't think we're quite striking the right chord on that. I actually think the league is a really good product. I think by virtue of the fact you just said there a second ago, I think we've still got probably all the team. I mean, Newcastle have won a couple of games now. They're sort of suddenly pushing themselves up the table. So I think we've got an ability and now that there's jeopardy back into the league, which I am a firm believer on, there should be consequence to failure, no matter who that is, albeit, and I'll come on to what that consequence looks like and where I think a bit of focus there needs to go to. But I genuinely think that we, as an English league structure and format, I think we've got a good product that I think we should continue to invest in. I think we need to continue to go on that journey with the players and utilise their assets and their IP and have them invest in what ends in time and energy into what the art of the possible could be. We've got some really good players and commercial assets and IP within our group that I think we can really help to leverage that fan growth.
What is the most untapped revenue opportunity today in Harlequins that currently does not drive revenue?
I think one of the focus areas, certainly that we're putting on over the next year, 2 years, we've got the biggest social reach of any club in England. So
how big is that?
So we're probably now about 750,000 across all of our aggregated channels, so TikTok, Insta, Facebook, etc.
How many people do you have in a content team?
3 or 4, maybe.
3 or 4. Is that normal?
I don't know how that would compare to other clubs. We do some benchmarking, but off the top of my head.
Do you think that's investing enough in it?
There's a couple of parts to that. One, we are loss making, so we manage every single part of our expenditure very, very tightly. But then there's equally an argument to say, well, look, if there's a business case to say that it's going to generate and turn that investment into profit, then it's worth investing in. So 4 years ago, we were probably 4th or 5th biggest team in terms of our aggregated reach socially. We're now comfortably out in number 1. Also, I'll just substantiate, we were about 50th in the world across all of the global teams. We're now 9th. So we've put a huge amount of effort into focusing on our content. Some of that comes down to what we deliver on the pitch. So it's just, I don't know, you'll have seen it. Tyrone Green is one of our players, scored this amazing wonder try of the season last year, where Marcus hits this crossfield kick and he literally dives midair over the try line and manages to dot the ball down literally in like a piece of grass that's like probably a square foot. Otherwise he would have been out of the pitch and out of touch. So he scores this try and it gets up like hundreds of thousands of impressions. So we've got players that drive content, the tone of language as to how we communicate with our fan base. Again, winning it was quite a big accelerant to suddenly creating momentum in terms of how we wanted to change our tone of language. And yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say we're provocative in a way, but there's a way in which we play that I think just creates a huge interest, and we've sort of reconnected with that over the last few years. So we've put a huge effort into driving that as one of our big KPIs. And so therefore I think I certainly think there's a way in which we can create more value. I mean some of that in terms of commercial sense, to generate a bigger level and a bigger community and a bigger value into the club.
What do you not spend money on today that you would most like to spend more money on or money on?
One of the areas where we are about to invest, all being well, subject to planning, are our training centres probably now not quite operating at its optimal level. So we've been in where we train down in Guildford, we've been there for 12, 13 years. And in that time, our men's programme has increased quite significantly in terms of probably the size of the squad, but also the frequency with which we now train, and we require the players to come in and eat with us so we can have a bit more input and influence into nutrition, and we understand more about them as individuals. We put a huge amount of work into trying to develop them as players, as people.
How much does it cost to upgrade the training grounds?
What we're trying to do is create a purpose-built high-performance centre that also is strategically geared around our men's programme, but is actually now built with our women's programme in mind. So it's purpose built around their needs and their requirements as well. So you're dealing with two squads that are almost exactly the same size. Plus then our academy aspirations, and we have development programmes that sit below that. So if you're even if you're looking at our men's and women's elite programmes, that's, well, as I said earlier, that's probably nearly 100 athletes, 100 players across those two programs. So it's going to cost several million quid in order to give you something that you think is going to be fit for purpose now, but also can future plan against, right, where do we think the women's program is going to be in 10 years' time? Any changes and amendments that we think is going to happen into the men's program? The other thing we really, really want to achieve as a group is to put our commercial team and our performance team under one roof. So at the minute, our commercial team sit out of Twickenham. Our playing department sits, including players, coaches, support staff, all operate out of Guildford. We're not like a multinational PLC, so in order to create this togetherness that's quite easily defined across a manuscript of this is how we operate and behave is harder to do. So they only tend to interact possibly twice a month as a one group, and even then, it's on a match day, so everyone's focused and. Yeah. So I've long had this sort of aspiration that I think if we can coexist under one roof, then the ability for our marketeers and our commercial team to ensure that they're integrating club-wide plans around, right, how do we grow our social reach? How do we monetize our digital reach? How do we bring the players on that journey with us? How do they understand what we're trying to, what the overarching objectives of the club are? Well, in order for them to buy into that, they need to be a bit more entwined into that. And then similarly, any aspirations that our commercial team want to have, and they expect the players to go on that journey with us, then understand what the playing pressures are, understand what, playing ultimately comes first, because we have to achieve everything starts and stops with success on the pitch. But if you've got them more aligned under one roof, we'll create, I think, a better culture and environment.
It kills me for this, but I'm always fascinated. How much do you spend on food for the team? And what foods do you promote, not promote? Like, how do you think about that?
They metabolize a lot. Have you seen some of them? And that doesn't even compare to some of the French squads where they're absolutely enormous. But look, I don't know. Our food bill is going to be in the tens of thousands
a month.
No. Over the course of the season, it's like Levy deliver all of our food operation at the stadium. We're more independent down in Guildford where the teams train. But we have a nutritionist who, and it can vary from player to player, by the way. And again, we don't have the budgets that we would probably like a Premier League football team would have. I think if you walked through the door of a Premier League training ground comparatively to ours, and having said that, there's some, which is one of the reasons why we want to invest in ours. Some of the other training grounds in Premiership Rugby are of a good standard, very good standard, but we need to aspirationally get back to that sort of level. But they're well looked after. And equally, there's an onus on the player, I think, to understand what's good for them, what's not good for them. But don't get me wrong, we win a game at Sale, and within 50 miles of leaving Manchester, we're probably at a service stop, and the boys are filling up on some well-rewarded sort of scran from the fast food joint.
Can I ask you your thoughts, moving just slightly differently into like a conversation around calendar alignment and the challenges that can present you as a club CEO? Because you got international rugby, right, which is a huge game, and nearly 1 billion people watch the Rugby World Cup final. That doesn't convert in the same numbers down to club rugby quite often. You know, this thing that we have where you lose a number of your star players, we've just talked about how important star players are to attract crowds. You lose internationals, the Premiership season continues to run when some international tournaments run. That's a really tough environment for you to operate in. Do you think there needs to be, to really see club rugby fulfill its potential, a better management of that rugby calendar to ensure that both can fulfill the potential that they have?
So we're closer to that now than we've ever been because we've got a more contracted league. So, for example, the conflict that we have now is that as part of the new PGB agreement, England get access to the elite playing squad 1 week before the autumn international start, 1 week before Six Nations. So I wouldn't say we're entirely independent of that at this moment in time. Whether that structure has the ability to change in future, it may well do. We may still get continued relief from that. But the crossover to where it was 2-3 seasons and further back than that is far less now. So, and I do agree, the audience that England rugby attracts is probably 10 times bigger than what the Premiership attracts, which again is the antithesis of where it is in football. So we need to generate some of that tribalism to the club game where in football it's almost just a given, like 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. You're at the stadium and there's nothing going to stand in the way of that. We used to joke at Wolves that if you moved house, you'd ring the club and then you'd ring your bank. I mean, that's kind of how regimented it is. And so I think we need to capture some of that audience transfer, which is why you'll see now, and it is happening, Premiership and England rugby marketing is now converging way more than it ever has done in the past. So back to that try that I was talking about a second ago, that will have been posted and reposted by England Rugby and given scope, or anything that Marcus does in a Quins shirt gets England leverage as well, and vice versa. Marcus in an England shirt is going to get a lot of club noise as well. So the crossover's much less. And if we're going to genuinely say, look, we think this is the best product that we can put on the field, then yeah, absolutely, we need the best players on the field.
How are you able to do the big Twickenham games? And I mean that from a fairness perspective in a league. Yeah, you've got this amazing stadium on your doorstep that has a huge number of people. Is it even an issue? Or, do you just get to do it because of your locality and it's a great showpiece for Premiership Rugby?
I think there's probably a couple of ways to answer that. Easy for me to say because I sit here as the club that generates a huge amount from it. We take all the risk. And the risk was ultimately taken by a predecessor of mine.
So what's the risk?
So we hire the stadium. We take all of the cost risk. We take all of the marketing risk. Therefore, we take the ticket upside. And so if the thing flops, it's not an non-sizable amount of money. We're renting an 80,000 capacity stadium. So it's in the hundreds of thousands. So yeah, and as I say, we need to ensure that we fill that. And so the risk for us, you need to cover your cost exposure, and then get to a attendance capacity where a lot of that cost is all covered. So therefore, you're in the bandings where the tickets that are being sold are far more profitable than the first sort of.
What is that break-even amount?
So the way I'd answer it is, if once we start going over 35, 40,000, it's makes more sense for us to do it at Twickenham than at the Stoop.
So really, it's not being allowed to do it's the wrong question. You're able to do it because you're willing to take a punt that maybe other clubs wouldn't be so confident in taking.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
Could Saracens fill the ground if they took it?
They do one at, I'm going to answer that carefully. They do one at Tottenham, which they have a really, they sell out and they fill. And they've done one at Wembley in the past, which is, I think, it's pre-me, but I think reached reasonable levels of capacity. They play us predominantly, so it's a London derby. It's going to attract a huge interest. Arguably, their risk profile is greater than ours. So again, if you're talking about commitment and courage, they go a bit further down the street than we do. But even so, even though we only go across the 316, it's not without, we invest heavily into our marketing. We had the courage to do it 15, 16, 17 years ago. We've evolved the product identity over that period of time. And certainly in the 5 years that I've been involved, we've made more investment into the music act. We've made a lot of investment into the actual identity of the day. You were there last year, so you've got first-hand experience. We had a global DJ. We had, pyros, light shows. We did.
Rag and Bone Man came in.
Yeah, he did come in. We've taken a conscious decision, as I say, to create a product identity that differentiates itself from just a straight high-end professional sport event, delivery, match. The entry ticket price is 30, 35 quid for a day at Twickenham, where you get the women's game, the men's game, sandwiching Joel Corey or Rudimental or Pete Tong. We invest an enormous amount into the West Fan Village, where we install a fairground, which there's no cost to the fan supporter. That's all a club commitment to ensure that the experience of engaging in a Harlequins Premiership Rugby match.
Could you cover it with additional sponsor cost? So your sponsors must love it if they can maybe activate in a slightly different way, if you've got particularly concessions-focused ones. And
we do. Charles Stanley is our sort of match day partner for Big Game. So and don't get me wrong, as an individualized product, Big Game is comfortably profitable. It's only when you roll it into a lot of our other annual club costs and requirements and commitments that we have that gets blended out. But delivering Big Game probably has 4 or 5 times more profitability than a game at Twickenham than a game at the Stoop.
What club cost do you have that you'd most like to remove?
The obvious one that draws the questions raised is obviously salaries and payroll. I've got no issue paying what we pay to our staff, because I think that's a huge reason as to why we generate such high turnover. Mm-hmm. It's an expensive sport to deliver because the mandated amount of safety and security that we have to provide to players is high. We want to make sure that player welfare and player safety has to come first. So there's a huge amount of investment that we make around that to make the sport as safe as it can be. So the challenges we've probably had, the greater challenges we've had over the last couple of years have probably been around things like, again, I don't say this to necessarily convey a political persuasion either way, but the latest budget that was delivered has had an impact into the club of about £250,000.
What?
So because of the changes around national insurance. So we now need to find another 250 grand in order to meet that change in legislation. And so, and obviously, coming out of COVID, the more the utility costs of running a venue that has got high volumes of people coming through it is difficult. It's, and again, I'm not saying that to be woe is us, but I think what, just certainly in our space, the impact that's had now has just made it's just created another even bigger hurdle for us to get over in order to then get to sustainability. That's the problem that we've got.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned there, develop products, etc. Sport in lots of different ways is developing now. Products are developing, a lot more money's coming in, new ideas, new leagues, etc. They talk about the franchise league coming to rugby a few weeks ago. What do you think around that kind of disruption of a rugby landscape, whether it's that initiative or anything else that comes in and puts more of a, should we say, 2024 commercialised spin on the sport?
Look, I think if you were to speak to club executives, club owners, and supporters to a degree, I think we all want the best players, the best people performing in this league. I go back to the point I said a short while ago. Statistically, the league is in a really strong place. I think that needs to continue to be given the time to grow and develop as we are. There's some governance framework that just simply wouldn't allow that to happen. First and foremost, we've just entered into another 8-year partnership, as in Premiership Rugby, the RPA, England RFU. So, and we've got certain players, as I've announced this morning, for example, as a case in point, that are committed to this club for another 4 years. So I actually don't quite see how it even could happen in some ways. I understand the optics of why it's trying to. And by the way, I don't necessarily think that there's conversations off the table as to how we can globalise a club game that aren't worth exploring. And back to your comment about creating some alignment around the global calendar. I think there's active conversations that we can do around that.
But like a brand new franchise, pay the players 2 million, 3 million quid a year to go and participate in it is just too far removed from.
In my opinion, yes, yeah. And also, I just don't know. I don't know if the sport's got that globalised reach in the same way that a cricket has or certain other sports in order to deliver that and achieve that. I think there's some massive superstars in our sport. A proportion of them exist in our league. I think we should focus personally, and also we should focus personally on making the best out of the product that we have. But I think it would be within the club's right to feel slightly frustrated in that we've matured and nurtured so many of these players through our academy system. We feel that there's a pretty close relationship between club and player, to that there's a responsibility for us both to go out and deliver the best identity of the product that we can.
I worry about CVC's investment in the league, and I worry about it because when you do a portfolio approach, which is what they've done, they invest in a series of leagues and a series of sports, and then you have natural outliers, winners, which is bluntly F1 for them in that fund, and then you have everything else. And as any investor running a portfolio model, you don't care about everything else. It doesn't drive the returns, and all of your attention and reserves, which is your kind of excess capital, goes to that. I worry that that doesn't create good benefits for sporting leagues, and it just creates one entities.
When they're just one investment as part of a fund. And
How do you feel about that?
I think where we've probably been set back is the investment probably aligned with a global pandemic, one or two other things within our sport that created some roadblocks in order for us to get to where we needed to be. They have investment across multiple products within our sport. So I think aspirationally, certainly for me, and I realise we've got some degree of disparate broadcast investment at this moment in time, but I think the quicker we can get to a situation where we've got rugby aligned on one broadcast platform. So if you want to watch England, you want to watch Premiership, you want to watch Europe, you want to watch URC, and it's all accommodated in one broadcaster, then the better that will be. And I do genuinely think that that's going to be the secret to a huge amount of success as to how we grow rugby as a sport globally, but also in the club game. And as I say, I think my understanding is that was the original genesis for the investment, and we still need to try and work to see that through.
Do you think Quinn spent the CVC money wisely?
Frankly, it's up to our owners how they want to invest their money and how they want to spend it. They have poured their heart and soul into this club for 25 plus years, and we wouldn't exist without them. So, yeah, do you know what? They spent it wisely.
I guess it's like football right now, right? Your primary objective is making the club self-sustainable, not reliant on owner financing.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And look, I think we've always got their unequivocal support. The one good thing over the last 5 years is we've built a lot of confidence at owner level down through the rest of the club around what the broader plan is. It's working. We've still got some headwinds, but we're getting to where we need to be. I think we've got an audience that is highly enviable across a number of sports, by the way. We won Club of the Year at Sports Business Awards 2 weeks ago, and we were in a shortlist with Tottenham, Aston Villa, Fulham, Lancashire Cricket, and it was our fan growth, our digital growth, our commercial growth that ultimately won the team the award. That wasn't linked to what we're doing on the pitch. Obviously, some of those optics are as a result of what we do in the pitch, but the reason why the award went to us wasn't that. So we're on the right path, and I think our owners see that, understand that, believe in that, have the faith in that. And so, we'll continue to try and achieve what we can.
Quick fire?
Quick fire.
Let's do it. You go first.
What was the biggest difference between working in rugby and football?
So there's probably 2 or 3 things. Look, the baseline thing that is consistent is you're operating in a high performance environment where you've got some of the best, you've got the top 1% of the field ultimately are operating in your business, in your space. So you absolutely have to have the right vision, the right culture, the right people behaviors that exist. So that's all consistent. Everyone's got that overriding drive and passion and burning desire to succeed, which I think exists different to other sectors I've worked in. So it means the dopamine hit when you do well is like nothing else you've ever experienced. So the highs I had at Wolves and the highs I've had at Quins have just been incredible. The lows are pretty crap, by the way.
What's been the biggest low?
It's all linked to losses. It's like, as in, I don't mean financial losses, but operating through COVID, that was a massive, massive challenge. But in answer to your question, yeah, you like losing the semi-final with Wolves still haunts me to this day. As a
Have you built a coping mechanism? Like jokes aside, to deal with it. Go to the gym, talk to your family.
Gym a lot. I think exercising is the answer to a ton of ills. By the way, like I really do. Like and if I don't exercise, I had knee surgery in the summer, and I've not been able to exercise the way I want, and it has a massive impact on your mental well-being. Talking does, having a supportive wife, family, team around you, not like me as a like clutch of people, as in like the team in the club, that we have a good communication sort of mechanism, but it's shit, and it's a very individual. It can take me days sometimes to get over something that, like the Toulouse game, like took me several days to sort of get myself back into a space where it was like, well, what next?
That Wolves semi-final, did you mean the FA Cup one against Watford?
Yeah. Because I'm just about to go and poke the old bear.
One of my good mates is a Wolves fan. He's still down. It's the one thing he just cannot get over.
Yeah, I thought, look, I suppose there's the old adage, you get what you deserve in life. I thought we could have had a shot at the final. I think we would have given City a good game, and the manner with how we lost it in extra time. And it's just coupled into the whole season that we had. We finished 7th, qualified for Europe, semi-final of the FA Cup. It was like, yeah.
What was the best signing?
Well, if you look at it, I mean, Neves was game changing when he came to the club, because we went through a similar sort of re-articulation of our values, because we were accelerating so fast that we almost needed the workforce to suddenly believe, right, what the art of the possible is, but also we needed the fan base to believe it as well. And I'm a massive, passionate believer in transparency and open communication, sometimes at the right time, by the way, not necessarily just blurting out everything as you get it, but being communicative with the fans. So we went through this sort of period of reflection and change, and so when Ruben came in, it really aligned with, actually, we're going to put our foot on the accelerator and really go for this. And so he almost symbolised, I think.
How much did you buy him for?
18?
Some around there.
How much did you sell him for?
I'd left the club.
I think he went for about 40, 50.
But what's reported? Reported,
yeah,
probably.
But it was out to Saudi.
Three times that.
How did you get it? Because like Champions League clubs supposedly were chasing him, and I don't mean that in disrespect to Wolves, but it was a massive coup when you brought him in.
Look, we knew his agent well, but equally, other top flight Premier League clubs had engaged with him and not exercised the option to take him. We articulated pretty clearly, where we wanted the club to go. We were in the Championship at that time. What coincided with that, I actually think one of the best players we signed was Jota. I mean, he is next level, in my opinion. And it's no surprise to me at all that he's thrived at Liverpool in a team with other good players. And I mean, look, obviously Salah is on another plane to everyone else. But if you look at player contribution, commitment, finishing, he's excellent.
If only he could stay fit.
Well, yeah. He obviously he's had a few sort of issues in that regard. But I think when you then communicate with a player like Ruben and Diogo, that you're talking about other players that you're going to bring in and the culture you're going to bring in. And we had Nuno at that point, who I still I still regard as one of the best coaches I've ever had the pleasure to work with.
Brilliant. Doing amazingly this season.
Yeah, like again, no surprise whatsoever. No, to me at least, no surprise, because I know what his management style is. I know how he invests culturally in the playing group, believes in them. And don't get me wrong, like the year we went up, we didn't have 11 Ruben Neves on the pitch. We had a number of players that he'd nurtured and either allowed them to refine themselves, refine form positionally. Connor Cody, we moved him positionally from where he'd been probably 3 times before Nuno got hold of him and put him into the middle of a back three where we hadn't actually played in that system before, and he just took off as a player. I mean, he is possibly one of the most amazing individuals, by the way.
Connor Cody.
Yeah, like just next level human being in terms of his attitude, his team first behaviour, his approach.
Who's the most committed athlete you've worked with? When you just look across all of them, like their mindset is locked.
I'd say Marcus is hard to probably look past.
Really?
Like his diligence, his work ethic is something else. Yeah, there's no surprise why he's now achieving what he's achieving, because he just puts the huge amount of hours in to achieve what he wants.
What did you not do with Wolves that, with the benefit of hindsight, you wish you'd done?
Win the FA Cup.
Well, yeah. Beat Watford. Win the coin toss for which team played in what kit. And do you know what?
You wore white. Did you wear white?
So the way it works is you go down to Wembley about 7 days before the actual match, and they explain a lot of the match day logistics around how it's going to work, which end of the ground you're going to have, and what have you, and things like music, walkout music, and music that you play in your stadium, which you then get a running order on the day, and then they go, right, now the last thing to do is to do a coin toss for who wears what kit. And obviously Watford's and Wolves' kit is similar. Now I will caveat, they tossed the coin and actually turned to my counterpart at Watford and allowed him to call, and he called it right. Obviously the fans want to wear the gold shirt. It's you're a Wembley showpiece, you want to wear your favoured home shirt. So I don't know if you're sort of sentimental or you're superstitious, you kind of think maybe you go into the game already thinking, well, we're kind of hypothetically
away.
We're sort of almost 1-0 down.
I did not know that as well, that you had to do that. That was that was something that you guys did.
Yeah. And also, like you think of all the other millions of times you've done a fairly jocular toss of a coin with someone, and I'm going into this meeting going, shit, am I going to go heads, tails? I normally go heads. What am I going to do here?
Shall I mix it up? What did he say?
Genuinely, I can't remember what he called, but it was the right call. He won it, and of course he's not going to turn around and go, well, don't worry, we'll go in our away kit. Like he was like,
come on, yeah.
Or immediately walking out the room feeling a bit taller, sort of thing. Like this is going to resonate well with the lads.
So he rolls into the training ground, going, "We won it, lads."
Yeah. Put the away shirts away.
Yeah. All right, let's do a final one. When you look at Quins over the next 5 years, if I were to say it's 2029. Where will Quins be for you to be happy?
Will be sustainable financially. I'd probably put that. I put it into maybe 3 buckets. We need to be sustainable consistently, and I think we'll get there. I do. I want to see women's rugby. I think this is a seminal year for women's rugby. We're a home nation hosting a World Cup, so England winning it, and then the legacy of that percolating into the rest of the sport is an absolute given. So I'd want to see women's rugby again on an equilibrium in 5 years where it's professionalising and it's commercialising.
Which has more potential, women's rugby or women's football?
Well, they're not. I don't think you compare the two, because one's 10 years ahead of the other one in terms of its commercial journey. But I do think that the investment that's going into England women's rugby is currently streets ahead of anyone else globally. So I would expect. And even domestically at league level, whilst we've still got some way to go, I think the English women's Premiership is, some way the best on the planet. So we want to see that sort of mature as quickly as it can. And then, I want to see I kind of tried to make a commitment that we won the league in 21. which was 9 years after we'd won it the last time. I didn't want to wait another 9 years to win it again. So we need to get some more silverware in the cabinet. That's an absolute given.
I've loved doing this. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.